I'm ruined. My simp husband sold off my business after he caught me cheating with his boss.
The one very mistake I made ruined my life and my marriage. I didn't know that this mistake could mess things up for me. My husband caught me with his boss, and he didn't think twice before taking out his revenge on me. I take full accountability for my actions, but he just went too far with his revenge. He shouldn't have acted the way he did. His revenge was just too cruel. My husband perfectly planned everything and waited for me to fall right into his trap. I fell for it, and now I'm reaping the consequences. Hi guys, my name is Patricia, and I am a 27-year-old fast food owner. The name of my husband is Michael. He is a 30-year-old business analyst. My husband and I had been married for 3 years, but unfortunately, we're no longer together. We have known each other for a very long time. Michael was 18 years old when he and his family moved into our neighborhood. At that time, I was 15 years old. Practically, Michael and I were childhood friends. Michael and his family moved into the town at that time because they had transferred his father for work. And so, he wasn't familiar with the neighborhood. At some point then, both of us parents got closer together and made friends. But Michael and I had our own little differences and often argued over little things. Something seemed off with Michael at that time. He was not like the usual kids. He didn't like playing or associating with friends. He was always reading even when it was a holiday. Honestly speaking, Michael was an introvert. Few months after Michael and his family had moved in, Michael and I later got along. We became friends and spent time together whenever his family came over for dinner. We even attended the same high school down to college. We never dated during that period. We were just friends and neighbors. 2 years after graduation from college, Michael asked me out. I patiently waited to be his girlfriend. I liked Michael back then, but I didn't tell him because I didn't want to be turned down, and also we weren't friends. I accepted, and we dated for a year before we finally tied the knot together. The wedding was memorable, and I felt like I had made the best decision at that time. We were in love with each other. So guys, a few months after our wedding, everything moved fine, and we lived happily. We were an average couple then because we were just trying to figure out something meaningful with our lives. We planned to not take any financial assistance from our parents, and we survived each day. At that time, our parents' relationship became stronger because of our union. Despite everything then, Michael treated me nice. We went on regular dates, and he also bought me gifts. He never gave me a chance to look outside or even regret marrying him. That even brought us closer together. 1 year after our wedding, Michael got promoted at his office. He gave professional advice to the company he was working with, and also was made a personal assistant to his boss. After Michael's promotion, everything went well, and we lived happily. I also opened a fast food restaurant with the help of Michael. He supported my business and came over to help me out with work anytime he was work-free. It wasn't an easy start. The first few months were challenging, but I overcame all the challenges with the help of Michael. My husband also referred his colleagues to the restaurant to either have breakfast, lunch, or dinner, and they all did. One day, while I was at the restaurant sorting out the sales for the day, I got a call from Michael's mom, Trisha. I quickly picked the call, and we exchanged our usual greetings. Michael's mom and I were very close. She treated me more like a daughter-in-law. Apparently, Trisha gave birth to Michael and 3 other boys, and so she took me like the daughter she never had. So guys, after our usual greetings, she told me that she was trying to plan a surprise for Michael Dad's 60th birthday. She told me that she wanted an extra hand, and I was the perfect person that would help her carry out the surprise. I was excited and told her how happy I was to help out. So I got off the phone and headed over to the house later that day. We made the necessary arrangement and set out the things we needed for the surprise. Everyone knew about the surprise except for Michael's dad, Dave. Trisha gave out a strict warning to all of us, and we all complied. 3 days later, it was Michiel's dad's birthday. The surprise really came out good. There were lots of drinks and food to eat. Everyone came with gifts, and it was a nice birthday party. Michael and I also gave him a very thoughtful gift. We all had fun. It was indeed a wonderful night, and everyone enjoyed themselves. The party ended at 10 p.m., and everyone exited the venue. My husband and I drove home together that night, and we headed to bed straight because we had a tired night. The next day, I woke up and turned to the other side of the bed, but I didn't find Mikhail as usual. He must have woken up early to go to work. I got out of bed and prepared myself to go to the restaurant. I did my morning routine and left home. I arrived at the restaurant and I saw that there were a lot of orders waiting for us. My workers and I got to work and we cleared it out. Not long after we had opened, my husband walked in with his boss, Raphael. His boss wanted to have breakfast at the restaurant that morning. My husband's boss had come over several times to have food at the restaurant. There were times he came and had food with his clients. I was used to having him around. So guys, I took out his order and one of my workers, Kate, served him. My husband also had breakfast with his boss. I sat at a corner and watched them eat. They kept talking about business, and at some point I didn't really understand what they were really discussing at that moment. A few minutes later, they were done and were ready to head out of the restaurant. Raphael left a huge tip for me because of how tasteful the food was. I declined at first, but he seemed persistent. And also, I looked at my husband to see if he was okay with it. But Michael didn't bother, and I collected it. I was very happy, and I thanked him for his generosity. We left the restaurant, and so I walked them to the car. They got into the car and drove off. Then I walked back into the restaurant and continued my work. 2 months later, it was our 3rd-year wedding anniversary. I got up very early that morning before Michael. Apparently, I had been planning on surprising him. A few minutes later, he got up. We exchanged our greetings and we told ourselves happy anniversary. I was very happy that he remembered despite his busy schedules. We got dressed and we went to our place of work. So guys, I got early from work that day because I wanted to surprise my husband. Of course, it was our 3rd year as a couple. I called him on the phone and told him to come back early, which he assured me he would. I went home and made a nice meal for. I wanted us to have dinner at home. I did everything and lighted the candles. It was a romantic dinner date just for the two of us. Not long after, my husband arrived home, and I waited at the door for him to come. Immediately, he opened the door and I yelled, "Surprise!" He was so happy to see that I had taken time to celebrate our anniversary. We hugged and headed to the dining table. Apparently, my husband got me a gift when he was coming from work. We exchanged our gifts and professed our love to each other. We then proceeded and ate our meal. We cleared the table after we had our meal and went to watch our favorite TV shows. And after a while, I slept off. I couldn't watch the movie until the end because I was very tired. The next morning, I woke up and found myself on the bed. Michael must have had a hard time taking me upstairs. I thought to myself and laughed. As usual, my husband had left early to work. I decided not to go to work that day because I wanted to visit my parents. I haven't heard from them for a while then because I was so busy with work that I hardly had time for myself. I called Michael and informed him I would be going to see my parents. He said okay and told me to come back early, which I agreed to. I went to the bathroom and had my bath, got dressed, and left. I didn't bother informing them because I was very sure they were going to be at home. Plus, I wanted my visit to be a surprise. I arrived at my parents' house 15 minutes later. Yes, it was a 15-minute journey. We were that close to each other. I got out of my car and headed to the door. I knocked a few times, but no one opened the door. Everywhere was silent and I wondered what could be wrong. I still remembered the passcode and I went inside. I got in and no one was at home and everything was neatly put in place. I took my phone and called my dad, but his lines were off. At that moment, I was scared and had bad thoughts running through my mind. I called my mom, and after a few rings, she picked the phone. I asked her if everything was okay and why they weren't at home, but she said all was fine and told me not to bother myself about anything. Apparently, they went to visit a friend of theirs a few miles away from the neighborhood. So, guys, I was happy that nothing happened. Before I got off the phone with my mom, I told her I would wait for them to come back, and so I waited. A few hours later, they arrived home. I was very happy to see them, and we chatted for a while before I left and headed back home. By the time I arrived home, it was a few minutes past 6, and Michael hadn't come back at that time. I called him, and he told me he was a few minutes away from home. I went inside and freshened up and went downstairs. I thought about the things me and my mom had chatted about, and I felt happy. I had really missed them. Sometimes I feel like I haven't done enough for them. I was reminiscing about the fun I had with my mom when Michael walked in. I was startled at first because he didn't knock on the door as usual. Maybe I must have forgotten to lock it. We greeted each other and we asked ourselves about our day before he went upstairs to change. Immediately, I left to set his dinner, and I continued with what I was doing. A few minutes later, he came down to eat his meal and went back to the room. I was very curious about it because it was unlike him, and so I got up and asked him if everything was okay. He told me that he was just tired from the day's work, and so he came back to lie down. Honestly speaking, at that time he looked very tired. I also joined him in bed and we rested for the night. Michael's behavior continued for a couple of weeks, and I was becoming fed up with his constant mood swings. I decided to pressure him into telling me what was wrong with him. After much persuasion, he told me that he had been overworked by his boss for the past few months, and I was very surprised because he had told me they were not very busy at that time of the year. He then explained to me about them expanding their business and all. I saw the work was taking a huge toll on my husband, and I decided I was going to do something about it. The following day, I made up my mind that I was going to speak to Michael's boss, Raphael. I know I made the decision to do that on my own, but I needed to do something about it because my husband was grinding himself to the ground, and I knew he was not going to say anything to his boss because he loved what he did, i.e., his work. I was in the restaurant 2 days later when Michael called me about a work trip he was going on at the last minute, and I saw it as an opportunity for me to go pay his boss, Raphael, a visit. I knew I was doing the right thing because it was for the welfare of my husband. I quickly finished what I was doing and I left for their office. I got there, and every time I come here, I am very much in awe about the organization of the offices. I told his assistant I was here to see her boss, but she told me I didn't have an appointment. I tried explaining to her that I know him, but she couldn't listen to me. I gave up hope, and I was about to leave when I saw Raphael coming out from his office with a man. I quickly ran to him, and I told him about how I wanted to see him, and I didn't have an appointment. He apologized to me, and he ushered me into his office. I sat down, and I got straight to the point with him. I told him about Michael's recent poor health and how he had been overworking himself lately. Raphael put me at ease about everything, and he told me he was going to cut back Michael's working hours. At that point, I became very scared, thinking that I may have jeopardized his work, but he quickly told me that cutting back his hours doesn't mean Michael was going to lose his job. I felt relieved because I knew Michael was going to be upset if he found out that I paid his boss a visit without his knowledge. I told Raphael not to mention my visit to Michael. He agreed, and he walked me out of his office with his hand on my lower back. I felt some type of way, because he shouldn't have done that because I was the wife of his employee, and I thought they had some sort of friendship. After leaving the office, I went back home and called Michael. We talked for some time, and I found out he was feeling much better, and also he was extending his trip for a little while because his boss gave him time to rest. But I asked why he couldn't rest at our home. He replied and said he needed to be away from the city for a few weeks. I agreed to it because it can get really intense with the work they do. We said our goodbyes and I got into bed. Things were moving swiftly, guys. My husband was fine where he was and my business was moving forward. I was at the restaurant when Raphael came in with a group of men in suits. I assumed they were from his work. I asked someone to take their other and I continued with my work some hours later. I thought I should leave early and go see Trisha for a while. I was about to leave when I saw Raphael still in the restaurant, but that time he was alone. I went over to say hello, and he asked me to join him for a drink, which I accepted because I didn't want to seem rude to him. We talked about random things, and I discovered that Raphael was actually a very interesting person. He told me how he worked so hard from an early age, and because he was from a rich family, he had to work extra hard. I also told him about how Michael had worked his way up to be where he is today. I also told him it was one of the things I admired about my husband. I admired his dedication. I finished up my drink and I told Raphael I was meeting Michael's mom for dinner and I had to leave. He offered to drive me since it was late and I accepted. We talked on the way and I saw that I had misjudged Raphael because he was actually a very funny and easygoing guy behind the suits and the serious face he carried. He was so easy to talk to. He dropped me off, and we said our goodbyes. I greeted Trisha, and she kept on saying she hadn't seen me in months. I knew she exaggerated a lot, but months? We laughed over it, and we talked about Michael's recent trip, and she had asked me how I was doing without him. I told her I was coping fine. We ate and we gossiped for a little while before I went back home. When I got home, I went straight to bed, and I made a mental note to talk to my parents the following day. I woke up the next day ready to get to work when Michael called me that his boss was coming over to the house to get some particular documents he had left behind. I knew that I was already going to be running late for work, and I decided to wait for Raphael. I was finishing up my breakfast when I heard the doorbell. I knew it was Raphael, and I invited him in. I gave him the documents, and he handed me my pair of earrings I left in his car last night. I thanked him, and I was about to lead him to the door when he begged me to make a cup of coffee for him. I agreed to do so because he was really a nice person, and he was just asking for me to do little. We continued to bond over the coffee, and Raphael kept flirting with me, and at first, I never saw it as anything serious, but it kept coming. He could tell me I was beautiful, and Michael was lucky to have me. It never meant anything to me, and I decided to overlook it. A few days later, Raphael kept visiting my restaurant, and he kept on flirting with me. There were days he could enter the restaurant and sit for hours watching me work and waiting for me to finish my work. In those days, I found the sweet side of Raphael. I got into the restaurant one morning, and I saw a bunch of flowers waiting for me on my desk. I looked at the card and discovered it was from Raphael. It brightened my day, and a few minutes later I received a call from Raphael, and we talked and he made me laugh throughout our conversation. I had to end the call because I was getting another call from my husband. I spoke to my husband not feeling guilty because I thought what was going on between me and Raphael was not that important, and there was no need for me to worry him over it. I talked to Michael about when he was coming back because I missed him, to which he said he had returned in a week's time. I was very excited because finally he was coming back and I was not going to be lonely again. A day later, Raphael asked how long it was since I went out for dinner, and I couldn't remember, to which he suggested we go out for a friendly dinner. I accepted because I thought it was harmless and all. And since it was going to take a few days before Michael returned, I decided to take him up on his offer. I got dressed and Raphael picked me up. I didn't know how he knew my favorite restaurant, but I was happy to be there. We ate and talked for a while. With Raphael, it was very easy to communicate because he always puts you at ease. I checked my time and I discovered time had passed and there were only a few people remaining at the restaurant. At that point, I was very tipsy. Raphael offered to drop me home, but I had to decline because it was really late, and I didn't want to be driven for a long time. I told him to find me a hotel to sleep for the night, and I could go home in the morning, but he suggested I could sleep in his guest room. I accepted, and he drove us to his house. We got to his house, and I knew I was tipsy because I couldn't see properly, and Raphael helped me change my clothes. One thing led to the other, and we started kissing. I didn't know what was going on in my head, but I wanted it to happen, and that was the last thing I remember before everything went blank. I woke up the next morning with a mild headache to see that I was in a strange place. Before I could make out where I was, I heard the voice of my husband, and the next thing was him standing at the door, looking at me horribly. I turned to the left and I saw Raphael naked on the bed. I saw a lot of pain in Michael's eyes, and I knew I was in trouble. I left the room without a word and I tried to get dressed and run after him, but Raphael held me back and told me to allow him to be for some time. I felt like it was not a good idea, and I got dressed quickly and went looking for Michael only to see he had left. I looked for a cab and went home looking for him, but he was not there. I kept on trying to reach Michael, but he was not answering me, and some days later Raphael came by to the restaurant, and I asked him if he knew where Michael had gone. But he didn't know I was getting irritated at that point because I wanted him to come face me and let us talk things through. A few days later, I woke up ready to start my day, and I decided not to think about everything for once and put myself first. I got to work, but my restaurant was closed. I was shocked because my employees are always early to work, and we don't close the restaurant at that hour of the morning. I got a paper served to me saying I was no longer the owner of my business because it had been sold. I thought it was a very good joke, and I started laughing. because I didn't see how it was possible. I decided to call Michael because he was the only one who could understand how I was feeling, but I couldn't reach him. I called Raphael, and he came as soon as he could. I gave him the papers with my hands shaking. Then Raphael told me after that Michael, being the legal owner of my restaurant, had sold it. I didn't want to believe him at first because I knew Michael wasn't that cruel. But I remembered what I did to him, and I couldn't hold my tears. My whole life's work had been thrown into the drain by Michael. That was the cruelest thing to do to anyone. I got home to see my things were outside with Michael standing at the door with the divorce papers. I begged him to listen to me, and I tried explaining to him that the house was mine too. But he said he had bought the house in his name. That's all he did to me. I can't believe he turned out to be a ruthless man. I'm still trying to process all that he did to me. Update. I've seen the comments, and I must say that you all are really cruel. None of you wanted to leave any stone unturned, and you made sure you crushed my pride. I guess I deserve it all. I cannot believe that I've ended up as a divorced woman who has lost everything. I thought things would charge, and I'd get back everything I've lost, but nothing like that happened. It's all gone, and it's as a result of my stupidity. At that moment, everything came crashing down on me. I had lost my restaurant, which I built with some much sweat, and I also lost my marriage, and I was homeless. It became clear to me that Michael was a cruel person who never thought of anybody but himself. This is everything he did to me, guys. I don't think I can ever recover from it. But I guess karma dealt with me.
I vowed that nothing will ever take me back to my estranged husband. I never wanted to have anything to do with him. I don't even want to breathe the same air with him. I didn't even want to set my eyes on him. I hated everything about him. My estranged husband is the perfect definition of a wolf in sheep's clothing. I left my husband while he was sick and took our daughter. Yes, I did it, and I don't have any regrets. But before you judge me, please listen to my story. Hi guys, my name is Samantha, and I'm a 31-year-old baker. Well, I just started a bakery recently. I couldn't really bake before, but that story is not necessary. I'm married to my estranged husband, Dennis. We got married 11 years ago, but we have been separated for 5 years now. We have a 10-year-old daughter. Her name is Elizabeth. She is the best thing that has ever happened to me. Elizabeth is my whole world. She is the reason I still have the will to live. I want to give her the best. I don't want her to suffer the way I suffered as a child. That's why I will go to any length to give everything. I can give her my whole life without thinking about it. My daughter and I suffered so much in the hands of Dennis. My marriage to Dennis was a total disaster. Dennis and I got married when I was 20 years old. My father sold me off to Dennis because he couldn't pay the debt he owed him. Dennis is a businessman, and so is my father. They did a business deal together and it went bad, so my dad married me off to Dennis, or rather he sold me off to him. In exchange, his debt was cleared. After the marriage or the business transaction, Dennis made my life a living hell. Dennis and my dad made me sign and document that I was never going to get divorced no matter what. Don't blame me. I was naive and I didn't even know the gravity of what I was doing. When Dennis made the offer to my dad, initially, he refused, but my stepmom convinced him to accept the offer so they will be debt-free. I was so stupid that I didn't know that Dennis had used our ignorance to his advantage. Things like that only happened in movies. How could it be possible that someone would trap another person into a divorce and there'll be no way to get out of it? I know you all are shaking your head and laughing at the possibility of that. Trust me when I say that when I think about it now, I laugh too. I laugh at how funny it sounds. I believed that I was stuck in a bad marriage forever and there was nothing I could do about it. Unknown to me that I was actually wasting time and deceiving myself. Dennis was very smart and he used that to his advantage in the marriage. He saw a family that didn't make sense and then he decided to use that to his own silly game's advantage. I lost my mom when I was 2 years old, so my dad remarried. After their wedding, my stepmom made sure I experienced hell on earth. She hated me for reasons best known to her. My dad was not always around, that's why he remarried. I was very close to my dad, but he remarried. All of that changed. He became distant because my stepmom always quarreled with my dad anytime she saw us together. She never wanted to see me talk to my dad. If she ever caught me talking to my dad, I would be in trouble. She would punish me by not giving me food. This made me scared. I was afraid of going to my dad and he was afraid of coming to me because he didn't want to upset his new wife. She controlled everything, even down to my dad's finances. She was the one that squandered all my dad's business money. She wears the most expensive and trending outfit. That was why my dad was in debt. She mismanaged my dad's fiancé and I became the sacrificial lamb. Things became worse when she gave birth to my stepsister Alora. I was completely neglected by my dad. Alora became my dad's favorite. Growing up, Alora got the best of everything, while I got the one she abandoned. My stepmom never bought anything for me. I always got what Alora rejected. I grew up without the love of a father and mother. So don't be surprised when my dad agreed to me off to his business partner. After the wedding, reality set in. My marriage to Dennis was just like being in bondage. He treated me like a maid. I wasn't allowed into his room. He would ask me to go upstairs anytime his friends visited. He wasn't proud of me. He never allowed me to go out with him. He was ashamed of me, I guess. He had maids before we got married, but immediately after our marriage, he sacked them. I became the official maid. I was sweeping and mopping a big house with a lot of rooms. He also made sure I washed his cars every morning. After that, I prepared his food. He made sure I was occupied with work 24/7. I was so engaged with house chores that I didn't even have time to feel sorry for myself. I cried to bed every day. I thought marriage was like a bed of roses like I read in novels. Nothing prepared me for what I went through in the hands of Dennis. He never took care of me. He didn't buy new clothes or shoes. He told me I didn't need any of that because I was always at home. He never spent a dime on me. I was always sad. The more I tried to get his love and affection, the more he hated me. I was married but very lonely. Every weekend was always tough for me. Dennis would invite his friends over. They would party all weekend. They would drink, smoke, and litter the floor. I would be cleaning after them because Dennis would beat me if he found stains on his tiles or floor. Dennis has about 3 washing machines, but he made me wash with my bare hands. He frustrated me every chance I got. Dennis was a rich man. He had people doing all this for him before I came, but he sacked them immediately I came. That is why I don't regret leaving him while he was sick and taking our daughter with me. I was tired of the marriage even before it began. Dennis made sure I didn't have any money. He would send the gatekeeper out for grocery shopping. He never allowed me to do it. Maybe he was because he was scared of me taking his money and running away. One day I got tired of everything and I decided to run back to my dad's house. Unfortunately for me, my dad was not around. My stepmom chased me back and asked me never to return again, that I was already a married woman. She saw the bruises on my body, but she turned a blind eye to everything. I thought those types of things only happened in movies, but surprisingly, it happened to me too, and I was very surprised. After I was sent away by my stepmom, I didn't have anywhere else to go, so I decided to go back to Dennis' place. He wasn't around when I left, and thankfully he hasn't returned back yet. Then the worst thing happened. What I dreaded the most happened. Can you guys guess what it was? I found out that I was pregnant. I'd taken a pregnancy test after missing my monthly flow, but I never thought I'd really be pregnant. I was pregnant. Yes, guys, I was pregnant. I was so devastated because I couldn't believe I was pregnant with his child. I wasn't happy. It felt like my whole world was crumbling. I didn't know what to do. Worst of all, I didn't have a mother, no father, and no friends. Even if I had friends, he wouldn't allow them to visit. My dad tried visiting several times, but he never allowed him in. Anyone I've told this story today wouldn't believe it. It just sounds easy to leave such a situation. But for a woman like me with no money who was broke, leaving just like that was very hard. Children are gifts from God, so I didn't understand why Dennis was not happy when I told him I was pregnant. He was indifferent about it. I thought he would be happy when I told him I was pregnant, but the reverse was the case. I thought the news of my pregnancy was going to bring us together and he would start training me right. But I was wrong. The only thing he said is I should better hope I'm carrying a baby boy. All through my pregnancy, it was hell. The first trimester was the hardest. The morning sickness was extreme. I was still cleaning the entire house all by myself in that condition. Sometimes Dennis will return back from his business trips with his girlfriends, and he would ask me to cook and serve them. He always told them I was his maid. Some of them asked him to sack me because I was pregnant, that I was good for nothing. Remembering everything is making me tear up right now. I was scared of what would happen when Dennis finds out I'm carrying a girl. I already did an ultrasound, but I was scared. I couldn't tell him. I begged the doctor to keep the gender of the baby from Dennis, and the doctor reluctantly agreed. Dennis continued to maltreat me all through the pregnancy. There was never a day he looked at me with love. Soon I found out why he hated me with passion. Apparently, my father cheated him on their business deal. That was why he hated me. He was transferring the hatred he had for my father to me. Maybe it was because I'm the exact replica of my father. I'm not making excuses for him. I'm just trying to understand why he hated me so much. I finally gave birth to my beautiful daughter on a Sunday. I felt joy I've never felt before. I couldn't explain what it was, but I was finally at peace. I felt some form of relief all of a sudden. For the first ever since I lost my mom, I never felt alone again. But I can't say the same for Dennis. He was so disappointed you could see it all over his face. He left me and the baby at the hospital. I spent 3 days at the hospital without anyone coming to see me. When the doctor got tired, he had to discharge me because I was occupying space and the bills were piling up. Honestly, I didn't want to leave the hospital. I was getting food at the hospital. The nurses were helping me with my baby when I was still in the hospital. Now it was just me and my little angel. I found it hard to move around because I had a cesarean section. The doctor and nurses warned me to get enough bed rest and that I shouldn't lift any heavy objects. I couldn't do that because I had no helping hands, which made my recovery journey hard. It took me 6 months to heal completely. That 6 months was hard for me. I had no one to assist me, but I survived it all. My baby and I survived. Dennis one day never addressed Elizabeth as his daughter. He also transferred the hatred he had for me to Elizabeth. But I knew I had to be strong for my daughter's sake. I couldn't cry any longer because Elizabeth would cry whenever he saw me crying. I was tired of everything. I couldn't even buy diapers for my baby. Things were that tough. Dennis refused to put our daughter in school. When Elizabeth was 3 years old, I begged Dennis to at least put her in one of the cheapest schools around, but he said he didn't have any money to spare. This was someone that had a charity organization for less privileged children, but here he was saying he didn't have any money to spare for his daughter's education. At that moment, it felt as if I had failed my daughter. I couldn't believe my daughter might end up like me. If I don't do something, I wished I had little money to use and enroll Elizabeth in school, but I had none. Dennis stopped me from working. One time I got a job at a beauty store and Dennis showed up and made a scene at the store. After that day, he warned me never to go work ever again. Dennis always maltreated Elizabeth. He got angry anytime he saw her. Dennis made the house hell for us. We couldn't even breathe well anytime he was around. Fear always gripped us every time we heard the sound of his car. We always tiptoe around the house cause you never know what you will do and Dennis will get mad. I always dreamt about leaving, but I had nowhere to go. My dad would not accept me because he is scared of what Dennis would do. If my mother was alive, I'm sure she would have damned all consequences and saved me from this abuser. I knew I wouldn't even be in that kind of situation in the first place if my mother was still alive. I'm a mother and I know I can go above and beyond for my child. I might be called a wicked person for saying this, but when Dennis fell sick and was brought home by one of his side chick, I felt relieved. I rushed him to the hospital. After a series of tests, the doctor told me Dennis was down with cancer. Fortunately for him, the cancer was in an early stage and that he needed a bone marrow transplant. I was confused. I didn't understand what he was saying, so he decided to break it down for me. He told me my daughter needed to get tested. If her bone marrow matches with Dennis, then she would have to undergo a surgery to save her father's life. Over my dead body, I shouted, I would never put my child through that pain, not for a worthless man. Dennis doesn't deserve that kind of charity from Elizabeth. He was never a good father to her. How could I let my poor daughter go through a life-changing surgery just to save a man that never considered her as a daughter? Dennis was never a good father to Elizabeth. He doesn't know anything about Elizabeth. Let me shock you guys, Dennis doesn't even know his daughter's name. He always addressed her as A. I couldn't believe what happened to me was happening to my child. We both never experienced the love of a father. I called Dennis' parents and informed them about Dennis' condition. His parents arrived and they were devastated. His parents loved me, but they were scared of Dennis. They couldn't do much for me. Everyone was scared of him, even his own parents. He wasn't a good son, neither was he a good father and husband. He was rude to everyone, even his own parents. He didn't have any iota of respect for them. His mom wanted to visit me when I gave birth, but he refused. He never allowed her to come and assist me. There was a time I reported to his parents that he was maltreating me. His parents called him to advise him. He got angry and ended the call. He stopped sending money to them for a whole year. Truth be told, I was very happy to see Dennis in that condition. If for anything, I was happy he could no longer abuse me anymore. He was helpless. I was happy seeing him fighting for his life. I was having fun with the whole situation. I couldn't believe what was happening. Everything felt like a dream. The same man that used to act like a semi-god is the one lying down helplessly. I didn't feel sorry for him one bit. While Dennis was sick, none of his friends or side chicks showed up at the hospital. I was the only one around taking care of him. It's true what they said, what goes around comes back around. That period was one of the best times of my life. Suddenly it felt as if I had been set free from a cage. I left Dennis at the hospital. I only visited him whenever I wanted. I was living my best life with Dennis' money until one day, I overheard Dennis making arrangements with the doctor so they would take my daughter's bone marrow without my consent. Thank goodness I came to the hospital on that fateful day. I quickly ran out of the hospital as fast as I could and ran home immediately. I took a lot of valuable things I could lay my hands on. I took gold, I took diamonds and lots of money and ran away. Yes, I abandoned my husband on his sick bed. I did it without thinking twice. I relocated with my daughter to Australia. I knew there was no way in the world Dennis would find us, that is, if he survived. Everything was going smoothly for us again, life was beginning to make sense. The first thing I did when we got to Australia was finding a good therapist for my daughter. I didn't want to raise a damaged child. Elizabeth and I had been through a lot. The money I stole from Dennis' safe was more than enough. I made sure my daughter lacked nothing. I gave her the very best. She attended the best school. I was finally able to enroll her in the school. Elizabeth was very intelligent. Everyone loved her. She was too intelligent for her age. Sometimes, I wondered if she was really my daughter. She always made straight A's in class. She was just too smart. I regretted ever marrying Dennis, but I never regretted having Elizabeth. She was the puzzle that was missing in my life. I never felt lonely after I had Elizabeth anymore. If for anything, I became stronger and started fighting to live. Elizabeth was my everything. She was my daughter, best friend, father, mother, husband. She was the best thing that ever happened to me. I think God decided to compensate for my pain. That's why He gave me the best daughter in the whole world. While in Australia, I also started schooling. I never finished college. While my mates were in school learning, I was at home doing chores. I was in college before my dad made me get married to Dennis. Dennis promised my dad I would continue my schooling, but he never fulfilled that promise. He stopped me from schooling immediately after marriage. I went to school and graduated. I studied law in one of the prestigious schools and graduated with good results. I started practicing law professionally and I became one of the best lawyers in town. I never lost any cases. I was living my best life. Life was beginning to make sense again. Elizabeth and I spent 5 years in Australia. Elizabeth was 5 years when we left. Elizabeth never for once asked me about her father's whereabouts. She didn't ask me any questions. For someone that was so inquisitive, she never for once asked me any questions about why we ran away, and I was grateful for that. I never heard anything from Dennis or my father again. I didn't even know whether Dennis survived. Well, I don't care if he survived or not. I continued developing myself and my daughter. I never stopped learning. I kept acquiring more knowledge. I built myself with every resource I could lay my hands on. I was preparing myself for the war ahead. I knew we would one day go back to the States. I will have to go back and divorce Dennis so I could finally be free. Dennis and I were still married. According to the documents he made me sign, I couldn't divorce him or else I'd have to pay a hefty sum. I'm not sure those documents were even illegal, but lack of confidence never made me do the right thing. So guys, I was still married to him. So I had all the right to come claim his entire assets. Before running away, I put everything in place. I took all the important documents I could lay my hands on before running away. Leaving Dennis on the sickbed and running away with our daughter was one of the best decisions I have ever made. It gave me the opportunity to build myself. It gave me enough time to grow, enough time to fix my broken self-esteem. I was no longer the little puppet he played with it. I had become strong and independent. I was doing well for myself. While in Australia, I was just waiting for the perfect opportunity to return back to the States. I wanted to make a grand entrance. One day, while we were listening to the news, I was busy with my phone scrolling through social media when I got a text from one of my friends. She told me she got to know that Dennis survived cancer after his brother gave him his bone marrow. Anyways, it didn't matter whether he survived or not. What mattered to me was how to take everything for him. I was just waiting for the perfect opportunity. I called Elizabeth and told her to prepare that we would have to return back. She was not happy about that. She begged for us to stay there, but I told her we needed to go back to her. She needed to take over her father's property. She told me she doesn't need any of that, but I knew she didn't understand what I was saying. She was still a baby. She was just 10 years old then. I knew one day, when she is a lot older, she will thank me for that decision. I'm just doing everything possible to position her in the right place. One thing I vowed to myself was that my daughter would not go through everything I went through. I promised myself I would make her strong and independent, and that no man will ever be able to treat her the way Dennis treated me. One of the reasons Elizabeth didn't want us to leave was because she was scared. She knew how life was for us back then and how it is now. She also didn't want to lose her friends, but I assured her we would return after we secured her future. Finally, we got back to the States. Coming back to the States brought back old memories. All of a sudden, everything came flashing back at me. This very place felt uncomfortable for me. I started having a double mind. I wanted to go back to Australia. Old fears were coming back, but looking at my daughter, I had to be strong. I had to fight for my daughter's future. I didn't want to be a total failure like my dad. I refused to be a weakling. I decided to face my fears. Elizabeth and I lodged in a hotel, and I was just waiting for the right opportunity to announce my presence to Dennis. Soon the right opportunity came. The UN was hosting a ball in honor of Dennis for his humanitarian service to the less privileged. That was the perfect opportunity one had, and I took it. What do you guys think happened next? Hi guys, it's me again. So the ball was strictly by invitation, and I didn't have an invite. But I was allowed in after I told them Dennis I was a beneficiary of Dennis' humanitarian service. The ball was big, all his acquaintances were present. I took a seat and sat down quietly waiting for my time. Seeing Dennis smiling from ear to ear made me furious. Here he was, my abuser, pretending and acting like a saint. When Dennis spotted me, he got scared and pulled me to the side so he could ask what I was doing there. He was very shocked to see me. I couldn't believe that I'd fallen for his tricks before and that I let myself get confused by the games he tried to play. I made myself believe so many lies. How could I think there was a document that could make me never ask for divorce? I just didn't have the courage to look for a proper lawyer to help me out in court. Now that I'm a lawyer, I know better. That's the only reason why he could trample all over me and act like he was high and mighty. I disgraced Dennis on a night he was supposed to be honored, and I don't regret it one bit. He didn't expect to see me at all, and he made sure to make that clear. He accused me of leaving him when he was in his toughest moments, only for me to come back just so I could take revenge. I didn't even need to talk before he understood why I was present. He was threatened by my presence, and it was obvious. Dennis and I spent a lot of time arguing and having a lot of back and forths. He wasn't ready to back down, and so was I. I had to tell him how much I hated him before I spat on the floor and left him standing there. I still get goosebumps anytime I think about what happened, because it was hard for me to go through all that alone. Standing up to someone who hurt you before is really hard, and it takes a lot of courage to do that. I knew that the first step I had to take was to get out of the marriage. I was still legally married to him, and I didn't want it to stay that way, so I made the conscious decision to get out of the narrative without incurring any legal problems. I knew that what my father and I had been scared of before was just stupid threats. We were just poor, and that's why we didn't have the common sense to know that Dennis had just been trying to use our head. He just wanted to play mind games with us, and we fell for it. I still can't believe that there was a time in my life when I thought that I couldn't get a divorce if I wanted to. It took a much-needed break and becoming a lawyer for me to understand just how easy it was to get a divorce if I really wanted one. Ignorance can be bliss sometimes, but it takes courage to be smart. As a lawyer, I did a lot of research and knew I could divorce Dennis without paying a dime. I can even sue him for making me sign a paper under duress. The reason Dennis is scared of divorce is because he doesn't want me to get half of his property. That was why he forced me to sign a paper. Well, I'm back now, this time a lot smarter and bolder, and I'm ready to divorce him and take half of his money. I served Dennis the divorce papers. He was shocked. He reminded me of the paper he made me sign years ago, and I told him I could sue him for making me sign a document under duress. I told him it was illegal. I gave him two options: either he signed the divorce papers, or I sued him to court for making me sign a document under duress, and he might end up spending 5 years in prison. Dennis got scared. For the first time I saw fear in his eyes. I guess the thought of him losing half of his property to me humbled him. Immediately, he fell on his knees and asked me to forgive him for everything he has ever done. He asked me to give our marriage a second chance. He said he was ready to be a good husband and, most importantly, a good father. I was too smart to fall for that crocodile tears. The 20-year-old me would have fallen for his tricks, but I'm a lot smarter now. I know what he is doing. I'm very familiar with that act. It's been 5 years ever since I left Dennis, and he hasn't changed a bit. He was still as cunning and manipulative as ever. When he saw my mind was made up, he took his car keys and walked out. You guys would not believe what happened next. Dennis returned back and continued pleading, this time around with my dad. Dennis brought my dad to plead with him. I couldn't even believe my eyes, how my dad fell for his manipulation. I haven't seen my dad ever since I left for Australia 5 years ago. I couldn't understand why he decided to appear before me just like that, asking me to forgive a man that almost ruined my life. It was at that point I realized anyone can be a father, but it takes a real man to be a dad. People like Dennis and my dad have one thing in common: they were never a good father to their children. Anyways, I turned him down too. Dennis was trying to change my mind by all means possible. He went as far as getting me a new car, but I refused to be swayed by his antics. He started coming back home early. He even started taking Elizabeth out for ice cream. My innocent daughter was happy. She thought her father was beginning to love her. I knew he had not changed and was only pretending. He was only trying to change my mind. Dennis tried his best to change my mind, but when he saw my mind was made up, he decided to sign the divorce papers. He was scared of going to jail, I guess. I couldn't believe it was finally happening. The moment I have been waiting for is here. Dennis has finally signed the divorce papers, and I'm about to be free. It felt like a heavy burden had been lifted off my shoulders. For the first time in a while, I felt freedom. Hi guys, it's me again. I didn't know how tough divorce proceedings can be. The whole thing was exhausting. The entire divorce process was hectic. Dennis tried to buy the jury over, but he failed. I knew Dennis would not back down easily. Dennis employed the services of 3 senior lawyers. He told me I was not going to get a penny from him. He was so confident that he would win against me. Well, I was a bit scared too. Who wouldn't after seeing the lawyers he employed? I was able to calm myself down and just trust the system. His lawyers tried all they could to make sure I didn't get a penny, but I'm glad justice prevailed at last. Dennis and I finally got divorced, and I got half of his property. That is, I got half of everything he owned. You guys needed to have seen him that day. He cried hot tears. I'm not exaggerating, guys. He cried like a baby that lost his candy. I also got custody of our daughter. Dennis was also asked to start paying for child support. Dennis was fighting for the custody of our daughter because he didn't want to pay for child support. After the divorce, I decided to go start all over again in another city. I relocated permanently to Chicago with Elizabeth. I sold all the houses and assets I got from Dennis. I didn't want anything that would remind me of my bitter past. I invested for my daughter's future. Dennis was still paying the child support every month, but you never can't tell what might happen tomorrow. Dennis is unpredictable. I got a job in a law firm and I became a licensed lawyer in America. Life was beginning to make sense again. I decided to further my education while working too. I kept developing myself. I made sure I gave Elizabeth the best. She attended the best school and always came out top of her class. Sometimes, I wondered what I ever did right to deserve such a beautiful and intelligent daughter. Dennis never for once visited us in Chicago, he never even asked Elizabeth, but always sent money every month. I guessed he never forgave me for taking half of his money. He went around spreading false rumors about me. He told anyone that cared to listen, how I abandoned him on his bed and ran away with our daughter and how I came back again, to divorce him and take half of his money. Truth be told, initially it affected me, because people judged me without hearing my own side of the story. I was hurt, I wouldn't even lie. That was even one of the reasons I relocated from Los Angeles to Chicago. Dennis was hell-bent on destroying my name. As time went on, I no longer cared about what Dennis and his gossip mongers had to say about me. I ignored them and soon enough, they got tired and frustrated. As for my dad, my stepmom kept pushing him into debt. I heard my stepsister Alora got married to an old rich man. I'm not surprised though, knowing how greedy my stepmom is. I knew she can sell off her own daughter too, just like she did with me. She is one of the most selfish beings I know. I don't even know how she sleeps at night. I mean, I'm a mother and I don't see myself doing that to my child. My dad finally got tired of her flamboyant lifestyle and sent her away. I wished he did that earlier, I wouldn't have married Dennis in the first place. But I believe everything happens for a reason. If I had not married Dennis, I wouldn't have had my daughter Elizabeth. Elizabeth is my will to live. She is my best friend and everything. I work so hard because of her. I want her to know what it means to be a strong, independent, and hard-working woman. Elizabeth finally graduated from high school. It was a proud moment for me. She dedicated her speech to me. She described me as her superhero. Dennis got married again, this time not to a naive 20-year-old girl, but to a businesswoman like him. She divorced him 3 months later. Is not everyone that could put up with what I endured in the hands of Dennis. That is my story, guys. Now I understand the saying that you never know how strong you are until being strong is the only way. Nothing prepared me for everything life threw at me, but I'm grateful for everything. The hardship I went through made me stronger, and I'm grateful I survived it all. Thanks and